If the Bible's got you tied in knots, if you're burdened with religious thoughts, come grab a drink and join the choir. It's Heretic Happy Hour.
Well, hello, friends, neighbors, and countrymen. Lend me your ears, because this is yet another incredible episode of the Heretic Happy Hour podcast. I am one of three hosts. My name is Keith Childs. I am the author of several books, including most recently, Jesus Unveiled, Forsaking Church as We Know It for Ecclesia as God Intended, and the forthcoming Jesus Undefeated, which is about the afterlife and hell and all that good stuff. And oh yeah, baby, it's going to be beautiful. And I'm also joined by my co-host Matthew and Jamal. Hey guys.
Hi friends. My name is Jamal Javanji, and I just wanted to let you know that I am the likeness and image of the living God here on the earth, here in human flesh, as are all of you. The co-host, my other co-hosts are the same thing, and so are the listeners. And I'm also a life coach by profession in my day job. And I also am the author of the most recently released book through Choir called Living for a Living, which is really just about transitioning from living to make money for survival to living to provide, healing for the world through the accomplishment of our passions and desires, and how that can also lead to resources that enable us to do our work in the world. So that's me. I'm glad to be back on the Heretic Happy Hour with you guys.
And I'm Matthew DiStefano. According to Jamal, I am the likeness and image of Christ. According to some of my reviewers, I am one with the devil. So I'm not sure where I stand. But I do know that I have a new book coming out in October 10th, called Devoted as Fuck. And so there we go, waiting for that. And I'm excited to release this book. I just got from Choir. I just got back the edits and the layout, and it's looking good. There's notes you can. It's like a real devotional. You could take notes and shit. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think you lovely listeners out there are going to want to get your hands on this one. So, but I'm biased, so whatever. Excited to be here again for another episode. That means you, Jamal. You're next, buddy.
Am I next? Okay. Okay.
Did you have another stroke?
I don't. No, I was just looking at the notes here, and I see that we're in a new series. Is that right? Culture Wars.
Oh, you know what? He's right. Sorry, guys. It's my fault.
Old man Giles.
I'm sorry. I was about to give Jamal a hard time here. No, it's me. Yeah. So, hey, everybody. We are in we're kicking off a brand new series with this podcast. We're going to be doing a series of podcasts on the culture wars. So that'll be topics that are related to pop culture, modern culture, just things that people are talking about. And that's what we're going to be kicking off here. Coming up, I have a lot of great episodes coming up in this series.
Very, very cool. And I've mentioned this a few times before, but I'll do it again just for consistency. We do have a hotline. And the number to the hotline, and this is by the way, if the hotline is only for listeners. So if you're listening to this, you are invited to participate in the hotline. And the number is 240-343-7379. Again, 240-343-7379. You can call any time of the day. You can leave a voicemail. You can leave a text message, and we will get those. And we, our last episode, we kind of cleared the pipelines of the hotline, and we
damn it. Well,
what's wrong? Okay, so we cleared that, and we had a great conversation with some folks, with some of the listeners leaving their voicemails and text messages, and so. But we actually have a brand new voicemail that came into the hotline. So can we cue that up?
Hey guys, did you all know that you had a Heretic hotline? Anyways, I've only listened to the first 10 episodes. I'm actually on Hell No or Hell Yes right now. I just had to call to say first, thank you, because this podcast has really helped me process all the stuff in my head. Second, now more than ever, I'm convinced that it's not what you believe that counts, but just that your beliefs lead you to love. love being understood as freely giving of self. And third, perhaps you all have already covered it, but what does church look like for each of you now? Do you go to some building and worship, or do you all do some form of house church? I look forward to hearing your answer. I've only got 47 more episodes to listen to before I catch up, so you can probably take your time in answering this one. Keep up the good work.
Wow. Well,
I'm assuming you have some answers, Keith.
I've never really thought about that before. No, actually, yeah. So it's funny. But of course, the three of us are all going to give you very different answers right now. So I think that's great. That's kind of the great thing about this podcast. So, yeah, Wendy and I, my wife Wendy and I, we for the last 12 years now have been involved with house church, doing house church, but very different than I think what even most house churches that I've even visited are like. So it's extremely there's I'm not the pastor. We don't have a human being who runs everything and tells us what to do. We literally just come together with other believers, sit in silence, recognize the presence of Jesus with us, and speak to him, pray to him, sing to him, relate to Jesus as he's with us, and just kind of share what we know of Christ with one another and bless one another and help one another in our own personal discipleship to him. We might sing, and we certainly eat a lot and eat very well, lots of good food. And we kind of do that as often as we can. So that's kind of what church looks like for Wendy and I now.
Yeah, I don't have a church. I don't care. I don't know. I hang out with my wife and my daughter and my friends, and that's about it.
What about, don't you think the bonfire sessions, I'm going to give you a chance to plug something here.
Yeah.
Don't you think that's
church? No, I mean, well, thanks for bringing that up because, wherever two or more are gathered, and I know maybe I'm taking that out of context, but yeah, I hang out with my best friend, Mike Machuga, and we do a podcast now, and we sit around the bonfire and chat, and now we record it and then drink. Well, sometimes we drink maybe and partake in other, things. But no, I mean, if that's church, then fine. I don't need the label of church. I think there's so much baggage with that, and I think it's as far as officially, I don't know. I'm really just kind of agnostic, and I don't really care if what you call it. I'm just hanging out with my friends. So that's just where I'm at. Yeah. If you want to call that church, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a good question from the listener asking about our experience with church. I was obviously years ago, I was a pastor. So I was very much a part of the evangelical, the traditional evangelical church construct. So I was a pastor. I was also a part of churches before I was a pastor. And even after I stepped down as a pastor, I was a part of, traditional churches where there was clergy and laity and that whole, get involved in ministry and all that kind of thing. And then I kind of deconstructed from that and was influenced, from folks who were heavily into the house church, organic church world. So I really dove into that head first and got very involved in that and drank the Kool-Aid there. And I'll be completely honest, my wife and I just finished watching a series on I think it's a Netflix series called The Family. And I know that's about how the involvement of the religious right in politics. I know that's kind of the theme there, but I'll tell you what, it triggered me. That whole thing triggered me. It had nothing to do with politics. That thing triggered me because it was my experience verbatim. I mean, even down to the language.
Were you in the family?
Well, I was quote unquote in the house church, organic church family. And that, I'm telling you, even the things that guy taught I heard that the same language, Jesus plus nothing. It's about a family. We don't want to have a label. We don't have a name, all this stuff. But the abuses I experienced, I witnessed it in other people. I personally experienced it. Cult 101. And it's like, dude, that was my experience. That's all there was some good in it. There were some beautiful things in it. But again, it was still that us and them, believers, non-believers dichotomy. And it was a select club and tribe. It was not a healthy experience for me. So I deconstructed out of that. And now the way I approach the world is that I think that my understanding of the New Testament church is that it was a prototype of the new humanity, kind of how we relate. And so the way I view it is I don't really look at people as being believers or non-believers. I just see people. And so I think it's healthy to have relationships and healthy to gather with people. and that will happen, but I don't have a prescribed way that goes on, just kind of flow in that. So relationships, I value that. I don't really, so people, in the Christian world would say, oh, you don't belong. I was talking to my dad not too long ago. He's like, you don't really belong to any church. You're just kind of out there floating. But that's not how I would perceive my life. I feel like I belong to everything that is because I'm connected to all that is. That's kind of my perception. I don't really feel like I'm missing anything because I feel like the whole world is the church and we're a part of it.
Yeah. So just the takeaway from those answers is that we're all in a different place and it all means something a little bit different to all of us. And that's, maybe that's the point, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, I mean, here, this is sort of typical. I think anybody who's deconstructed their faith is probably not going to continue to go to the First Baptist Church on the corner. I mean, some of them might, and I'm sure some people do, but if they do, their reasons for doing so are probably because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to piss off, or insult a family member, or something like that. Like they're only going sort of for appearances, but not because they really enjoy it or they're comfortable there. And I mean, this is just based on the people I've talked to over the years. And so, yeah, I think definitely your idea of church is going to change as you go through this deconstruction process. So, and whatever you come up with for a solution, I think is probably better than what you are currently in, unless it's something abusive, kind of like what Jamal is talking about. Like I would run as fast as you can from anything that's trying to control you or manipulate you or get you to do stuff based on fear and control and all that garbage. But yeah, anything other than that is an improvement, even if it's just taking a walk in the woods or hanging out with your friend and having a beer or, so many better options.
Yeah. So I guess that means it's time for us to get to our Heretic of the Week, eh?
It's the Heretic of the Week.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sam Kline, and I am a heretic.
Hi, Dr. Kline.
I wasn't sure. Do I say Sam? Wait, Dr. Kline? Yeah. Anyway, hey, Samantha, so excited to have you with us on the podcast. I've known you for a while, although I know your husband really well, and I've gotten to know you a little bit recently and been reading your blog on Patheos, and I am always blown away anytime I've engaged you, either that's directly or just online. I'm really impressed with just a lot of the things that you have to say, and it's awesome to have you as a guest on the Heretic Happy Hour. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. You can call me Sam from this point on, but thank you so much. I think there's mutual respect in terms of the work that we do. So I'm glad to be here under under heretical conditions.
Right. So, yeah. And so, normally when we kick these things off, the first thing we want to know is, why is it that some people consider you to be a heretic? Sam, what is it? What is it about you? What do you say? What do you do? What is it that makes people call you a heretic?
Yes, I think it began a long time ago. I think first and foremost, questioning, and not just typical questioning about the scripture, about, trying to find out the Greek meaning of a particular word in the Bible. But I think it's questioning some of the ways in which we engage and live out Christianity that do not necessarily fit sometimes the norms in a particular church culture. I think that's number one. And I question, not for the sake of doing so, not for the sake of being disruptive or just, you have people sometimes, they ask questions because they just want to be a contrarian or to instigate. But for me, just simply just wondering, desiring, wanting to know more of God, that can be a bit disruptive because people may not have the answers. And sometimes people struggle with the ambiguity, and that could be seen as threatening, dangerous, heretical. Secondly, I think because of that sense of questioning, that sense of seeking, like for one, like I finished, I think weeks ago, a year-long series where I quit the Bible for a year.
Oh.
So doing things like that can be seen, something little like that, something big like that, can be seen as heretical. And because it's like, if you're a Christian, that's one of the things that a lot of times in our way in which we live it out, that you're supposed to read the Bible. You're supposed to read it every day. So the idea of quitting the Bible to follow Jesus can be seen heretical. And then on top of that, I mean, I talk about this notion of letting go of hell in Christianity, where some people see that as the cornerstone of their faith in some way. Letting go of that need to send people to hell in that part of my faith journey, that's seen as heretical. I've written about also like just exploring, beyond some of the things that just narrowly fit a lot of the ways in which we've constructed church and Christian living, whether it's crystals, whether it's a lot more that may be considered mysticism. I'm much more comfortable with exploring that, and that really may rub up against certain traditions in the church. On top of that, I've recently really made it known publicly that, I no longer consider myself a Christian. Although I believe in God, I believe in the power of Jesus. Jesus has been central to so much of my faith. It's definitely seeming heretical to believe in God, to still have Jesus part of my faith, but not necessarily think that Jesus is the only way, or to still keep Jesus in my life and understand that Jesus is very much a part of my life and still not consider myself a Christian.
Mhm.
The last thing is I write, speak, teach much about race, issues of race, race, gender, class, sexual orientation, a range of constructs, and how that is a part of our spiritual life. There are some people who believe that is something that's political, is not something that's a part of faith. So that in and of itself can be seen heretical and extremely disruptive. But I'm okay with embracing ambiguity, confronting things that aren't necessarily comfortable and that don't necessarily fit the way we've always done things just for the sake of doing them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, all that sounds like totally what we do here on the show.
Yes.
But go back, if you could, about this business of quitting the Bible.
Okay.
Maybe like a 2-part question. What kind of spurred on the desire to do that, and then how did that go? Could you kind of tell us about that process? What was some of the feedback you got on your blog, and what kind of stuff were you talking about there?
Oh, that's a good question, Matt. So it was a long time coming. Like sometimes what I found, Matt, is that sometimes by the time I write about things publicly, there's been months or years of a lot that's happening that people may not know about. And so it has been on my heart for months about really stepping away from the Bible, because I noticed how there was so much arguing, contention about, and I would say judgment and policing people about their faith and using the Bible as a weapon to do that. And I would have moments where I felt like people really need to put the Bible down for a moment so they can really follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And I got to a point where, I mean, there's so much that's happened in my life where I know that God, that Jesus was close to me and with me. And it was just beyond the pages of the Bible. And I got to a point where, and I was scared to do that, to step away for a moment to do that because of fear of what other Christian people who are close to me, the very close people to me, what they would think. But I realized if I'm going to, before I can tell someone else, like, hey, you need to put your Bible down, like, I need to do that myself first. So that's what that came. It's easy to stand in a pulpit and wag my finger and tell people what they need to do. But am I willing to do it myself? And so so that's what happened. I'm like, you know what? I can't tell someone else. I can, but it's not an integrity. We can tell people that. I'm like, you know what? What if I just do that? What if I just walk that myself? Let me walk that out. And so that's what that came about. And I knew before I even did that, Matt, like I sat with like a lot of the judgment that I knew that I would experience, and a lot of the emotion with that. Like I had to, before I could actually do that and write about that publicly, like I gave myself time to really process that myself, because I knew it was going to be very hard. I knew that there was going to be, I knew, you know, when you're in church for a long time, you know some of the things to expect and what people will say. And being a person that used to be extremely like, I know some of the things I would have said to my, you know, in the past, what I would have said to somebody who was doing that. So I sat with facing my own judgment, the way I would have judged people in the past. And I really sat with that for some time and really wrestled with that and felt all of the weight of that. So that when I did that, and when I did receive the comments about people concerned about my soul, that I'm going to hell, that the devil's going to get me, though the reason why is because I'm, you know, the devil, you know, all those things, I was in a place to be able to handle that. It was still saddening, but at the same time, I saw a reflection. I wrote about that, and this goes to your question about some of the things I touched upon. It's like I really couldn't even. I mean, I could, but because I sat with some of that stuff and saw how so much of that was me, I was able to handle and hold that and experience all of that shame and judgment and all this stuff that people will, you know, maybe try to engage in response. I was able to handle that and continue on and not take that personal, because I already have, you know, sat with all that stuff myself. I'm like, you can't send me to hell because I spent so many years sending myself to hell. I spent so much time judging other people. I've done the same thing. So people were sharing things with me and they thought it was new. And I'm like, honey, I'm thinking in my head, like, honey, I would have said this 10 years ago to somebody. You're not telling me stuff that I haven't already said with people. So it was very helpful for me to see, like, wow, Sam, this is how you are. This is what you would do to people. And to actually walk that out, it helped to not be upset at people like, how dare you? It's like, how can I say how dare you when it's like, honey, that would have been you 5 years ago. So and so I did express some of the things. Some of the things I talked about was just experiences that I would just glean spiritually just from my daily experiences. So there was so much that happened, Keith, Matt, that did not make that year-long blog. There were things I would just pick out one thing in a week, but it was just, there was so much rich lessons and experiences in Christ, and seeing Christ and experiencing Christ, and the ups and downs throughout that year. There was just so much that didn't even make the blog. I didn't talk about. There were some things that were just sacred that I did not even, I didn't write about.
Two things. We like to ask people how they got to where they are now, and what was that journey sort of like. I would like maybe to hear about how did you get from the place maybe you grew up in going through, I'm sure, some change, to where you're at now, and how did race come into that and become something that you want to speak? I mean, you are a person of color, you're a Black woman, so you're probably gonna have that propensity. But how specifically did you come to a place where you wanted to speak out on these things?
Yes, so I grew up in a small town in Mississippi, and I say that the legacy of Jim Crow was very present because I mean, just growing up, we had like Black homecoming, kings and queens, white homecoming, kings and queens. We had a Black prom, white prom. Wow. And I mean, I remember we were, some years ago planning like our class reunion. There was this conversation about, is it going to be segregated or not? I'm like, okay, we're grown people, we're adults. Wow. Why is this coming to my attention? Why are we talking about that? So, it was very pronounced with race and along the division in high school. And I think if you go to my website, you'll hear a little more, read more about that. But I had an experience where I was falsely accused of a crime because of my race. And it was a year-long ordeal. And after that was wrapped up, I was extremely angry, bitter, rightfully so. I mean, I was extremely upset about the whole thing. And so even though it was something that I thought about as a child and watched and reconciled and negotiated throughout my childhood, moving on into adulthood, there were some different experiences I had where I think I got to a point where I realized either I'm going to stay bitter and continue that path, or I'm going to figure out a different way to be, knowing that racism is not going to magically disappear. But how I'm going to live in this world, knowing that these things still exist. How am I going to choose? So that moved into that path a lot more. Spiritually, I wasn't raised in a church. And I mean, at some point, like for the most part, like we were banned from going to church. I remember one point we went for a little bit, but my father, he just became really upset about that. So that stopped. So I didn't go back until sometime in high school. There was a lot more wiggle room and freedom. So I got saved like in high school. And because I realized there was this void that I had. And I remember just getting tired of like the parties and all this other stuff. I was a nerd, but I also would go to parties and all that. And it just got old very quickly by like the end of my freshman, sophomore year. And that was very helpful once I, start having to deal with that whole false accusation. My faith was extremely tested and helpful for that. And so there was I was intertwined with healing and moving through a lot of the things, making sense of what does it mean to embody, these identities, these social constructs that I navigate in this world, and also growing in my faith. And so, that took me on a journey. I went from Baptist and then Pentecostal, Apostolic, non-denominational, conservative ministry. I mean, I went through this whole, there's a lot that I haven't written, talked about, but there was much where I was exploring with my faith, and there's some things that I wanted to know God. And I think that's the main thing that was just first and foremost, like for me. I just remember one point in high school, and I remember asking God, like, I just want you. And I asked God, like, I just want to know you and just know you. And if there's anything that's going to take me off that, like reveal it to me, but I just want to know you. I'm not trying to be committed to anything, but just knowing all of you. And I think that can be a dangerous kind of openness. Yeah. I always say it's a question, but an openness, because what I've found throughout these different experiences that I've had in religion, from being very dogmatic to being much more open. Well, I think the whole heart of it was going through those different phases was all of those were necessary because it was all shaping me and useful for a season. So some of the things were very useful. It was very useful when I was like in my, going through my Baptist season. It was very useful when I was like really hardcore in, ministry and serving. That was very useful. There was some knowledge and wisdom and teachings that were useful. And what I found is when you're walking with God and you're really seeking God, you're just not going to stay stagnant, because my journey's been like, sometimes I want to be comfortable. I'm like, okay, I'm in a good place. I've made sense of things, but then Spirit of God will just challenge that. There will be experiences and things that will just call for more. So I would say part of my experience has been, I will come to the end of what was useful for that season. And a lot of times people see that as I got it wrong. And for me, I don't see it that way.
Yeah.
Some things, it was like, this was useful for me for this time. Now I'm being invited to explore something else because, again, it goes to, I just want God. And so that's how I think things became from where it is, because let me tell you, Matt Keith, that years ago, like, if there was just no way you could tell me that I would say, oh, I'm not, like some of the things that I'm saying now, it's like, there's no way. Like, there's just no way.
Right.
So there's just, but when we're really seeking and we just want to know God, then that opens things up. But when you say, well, God, this is it, it stops at this religion, and you say, this is the answer, well, we close ourselves up. And he's like, well, this is what you want. This is as far as you're going to go, because that's what you only want to go.
Right.
And it can be very scary because sometimes we don't have the model. We don't have like sometimes a framework for that. Yet at the same time, either we can just, for me, it's like either we stay in a place and let it crush your soul and be miserable. So please people, or we can continue, even though it can be very uncomfortable and unsettling, continue to just follow God and how God is leading. So for me, it's shown me that, religion is a means and an end. That's the way I feel. Like for some people, and it's helped me, I think this whole experience has helped me to have grace for like a lot of us in our walks. Because some people, they leave the church and they just go full on like anti people in church. And I don't have that. Because for some people, part of their journey on this earth will be with what they're doing in the realm of a religion or a church. Right. And that's part of their work and it's part of their experience. And that's part of what they're here to do, to guide other people in their spiritual evolution while they're here. And for some other people, they may not ever set foot in any religion, in any church, and have a wonderful divine experience in what they're here to learn while they're here during this time in their life. And then for others, religion may be part of an overall experience and lessons that they have. It only serves a purpose for only so much time, but it's not for them to stay there. And so the more that, and again, like it goes back to the story of the gentleman that I engaged with, so many other people that I've engaged with over the years, is it opens up such a greater capacity and understanding for there's so much room for people in their walk and their journey. And to respect that and love that. So for me, some of the things I realized, my husband made this observation one day. He said, some of the stuff that you were like thinking way back in high school is like kind of going back to some of that. I'm like, it's so funny. Some things is like, the growth is sometimes it's cyclical and it goes back and forth. It's like sometimes we need to have these experiences to realize, like, okay, I was on to something way back then.
Right.
Okay. But sometimes I think we can judge ourselves. And I say that because I used to be in that place where I was just judging myself. And I was trying so hard on my own strength to live this Christian life. And I realized, and that's why I realized, like, it's not about, like, oh, I can't believe I spent 5 years in this ministry, in this church, and it was all wrong. Like, there were things that were very useful and helpful, and it makes who we are. So that's how it's come about. That's been part of it. The Cliff Notes, a very long Cliff Notes version of that experience.
Yeah. So what I love what you're saying as you're talking, I'm thinking, it's one of these things where you either have religion or religion has you. And if you're in a position where I love what you're saying about how if religion is something that's part of your process, part of your journey, part of the way you're trying to understand your spirituality or understand some idea of who God is, what he's like, and this is part of what helps you in that growing, maturing process, then religion can be good. The problem is when religion becomes like you serve religion doesn't serve you.
Yes.
And you're now, that's when you start getting dogmatic and it's like, I'm right and you're wrong. and you're stuck and you're not growing and you're not processing, you're right and you know it. And then that religion just kind of like hardens around you and becomes this kind of thick wall of armor or something that kind of keeps you from really connecting with God or others, and sometimes even with yourself. So it can be a bad thing.
Yes, and so much in terms of with these identities we have. Because one thing I find, not even just in the church and different people's spiritual expressions on this earth, is that sometimes we get so spiritual that we can use that as an excuse to not deal with what does it mean to walk out that spirituality on, just on our daily lives. And that's where I find when we look at the things I talk about when it comes to race, is that, it's not enough to just throw out a scripture and say there's no Jew, no Greek, but yet, okay, but our churches are so segregated. What the heck is that about? Like, it's not enough to just say these things. I'm like, oh, it's just all about love and just forgive. But it's like, how are you walking this out? But what about all these other things that's being ignored? It sounds good, but the spirituality is not doing well when my feet hit this ground and I walk it out. We're not walking that out too well. So for me, it's like, I hear these things and read these things. It's like, but I'm still having this experience here as a spiritual being that I deal with some of the stuff that comes with being a human being. And that is the labels and the ways we construct identities that I still live out, although I am a spiritual being. So my spirituality then, it must be, for me anyway, it must be useful. It must help and guide how I live out all of these intersectional identities with other people. And that's a challenge. And so that's been part of this whole growing and continuing to, I would say growing. Sometimes it may not seem like growing, but part of this journey, because one of the things that was useful for me, and some of the things that I think came from my walk is like, it just didn't just come from a Bible or church. It came from just living this thing out and really seeking God. And sometimes just having God when there's no scripture that's there, when you're crying in the middle of the night and you're just trying to get your life. And it's like, there's no freaking scripture that can help, but just having that experience and knowing that God's there and just getting those answers, maybe from a person that you meet or something that happens, and knowing that is very spiritual and just as real as the Bible. That I had one of the questions is like, what is worth keeping and what is worth letting go? And that was for me when I think about my identity, even let's just look at race. And I began to find like there's some things like everybody in all of our just racial identities and the culture that we've created around that. Like we all got some things that's useful, but there's some things we may want to let go of. And so that for me has been, what I find has been useful is getting to a bigger vision and having a vision-driven life. And I think sometimes when we are stuck in our pain or we're in denial about dealing with things and we haven't really dealt with what does it mean to have all these identities and grow through them, we can just get stuck in really having conversations that's locked in our pain, but there's not a vision. No one's thought like, well, what do you want? What's the end goal of all that? And for me, I found that that's been very useful as a spiritual practice to keep me in integrity as to whatever I'm doing. What are my principles and what is the vision? Because we can get really, I can get caught up in like the emotions and all these things that happen. That's really part of being a human that I can get off track, because of that. But I'm like, but when I get to the core, my principles, my deep principles and the bigger vision, then that what guides me. And that, to me, it challenged me because, again, it starts with me before I can ask anyone else, well, Sam, what are the things, I'm speaking in third person, Sam, what are the things that you may need to let go of that's not really serving a bigger vision? And I think part of our spirituality is like, how do you begin to heal through some of these things? Healing doesn't mean that suddenly we just ignore wrongs and injustices, but it helps us to be able to have a vision and be able to walk in integrity and be able to co-create with other people more effectively to move toward that vision and have much more compelling conversations for that. So my spirituality, it challenges me. I just recently shared like an article. I wrote a post, and it was challenging for me. It was like a study, and it was about fatal officer involved shootings, and the researchers were sharing that white police officers aren't as they are not more likely to kill Black people. That when I first came across this study, I'm like, oh gosh, that was very hard for me to even read that or see that. But I'm like, I'm going to read. I don't want to read other people's perspectives about it. I'm going to go through this myself. So part of my practice is to not just hear the things that I want to hear, to not read the things that I want to read, not to just have a yes woman echo chamber of knowledge that I consume. So part of my practice is not enough for me to expect other people to hear another perspective if I don't do it myself. And so I shared it because I'm like, part of my practice in my spirituality, and we connect this with race and all these other social issues that are very moral issues too, is that I must challenge myself to be that. What is it that I want from other people? How dare I expect someone to say, why don't you listen to another news source or read something else when I don't live it myself? So that means I'm committed to hearing, reading things, consuming things, weighing some things, hearing perspectives, and really putting that in conversation with other perspectives and making sense of that for myself. And I think if we have more people, if we take that on, but I think we have to kind of move through some of our pain and some of our other stuff that sometimes we don't necessarily deal with to be able to move through that practice.
Yeah. This is so good, Sam. Thank you so much for. I mean, golly, I wish we could just talk because I have so many things I'd love to ask you about if we had another hour to go here. But well, I'll tell you what, if people want to continue to connect with you, to hear the amazing things you have to say and engage with you on these issues, how can they do that? Where can they find you? And let people know what are you working on right now? You're excited about, and what where can people connect with you online?
You can find me at raceandgrace.com. So you sign up there so you can stay in the know about different things that's coming down the road. I'm working on a book. I don't have a title yet, but it's based on the experiences of Black girls in predominantly white school contexts. So that's coming. Like, I haven't shared that. So I think this is the first this is being put out there, socially. Yeah, the scoop. So stay in the know about that. I don't have a title yet. I have a title, but I'm not sure on it. So just so you'll know. So go to raceandgrace.com. You can find the links for social media there. On Facebook is Race and the Grace World. Instagram and the Twitter is at Race and the Grace. So just stay in the know about that and some other yummy things that's happening and coming out. And to be in a conversation. I really enjoy hearing from different people, when they agree or disagree, but drop their thoughts and share their thoughts with me. And thank you for having me. Thank you, Jamal. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Keith. It's been great.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been amazing. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been awesome.
Wow. I gotta say, guys, I really love Samantha Kline. She is amazing. I think if she doesn't already, she needs to have a podcast of her own or something because she's pretty incredible.
Well, I feel like that conversation could have gone on for hours and hours. Not in a bad way. Like she had so much great shit to say, and it was so beautiful.
And guys, I just want to apologize for just kind of talking, like monopolizing the time on that interview.
I know.
I apologize.
Yeah, I know. It was pretty much the Jamal Givenchy show, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was.
So sorry, guys, but it was great. It was a great interview.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I
was going to say, that kind of brings us, I think, to our topic for this podcast, kicking off the Culture War series. We want to start off with something light, something not too controversial. Just kind of ease our way into this whole culture wars thing. And maybe we thought we'd talk about something, that doesn't really cause a whole lot of division. Something like racism.
Well, and I feel like, maybe we should do a disclaimer / reminder that nothing we say on the show is like doctrine or dogma. And I think the beauty of the show is that we all come at it from different angles. And so just a reminder that when we get into the Culture War series, because, I mean, things are going to be divisive, and things that we say are going to probably cause a stir in people. And there's so many people on different sides of the aisle and have different opinions and views. And for some reason, like politics, social justice issues, that really seems even more than theology, I feel like. I mean, theology can really be a hot button thing, but I feel like even more so, culture and politics really becomes a wedge that that we experience. And just a reminder that like the spirit of this show is to have healthy dialogue and healthy engagement, and we're all learning and we're all growing. And so I don't know. I just feel like I wanted to put that out there before we even get rolling on this series, because like I said, theology seems to divide, but politics it can even get nastier.
Yeah. Now, what makes me nervous is when you say all of that right before we get into this topic. It's like right now you're getting ready to say something really racist.
Do you feel like you need to?
No. I mean, no, because I mean, I would hope that of all the culture war topics, this topic is one that the three of us would hopefully agree on mostly. Anyway, it really. This is for me though. This topic is a trigger topic. I was born in Tennessee. And we moved away from Tennessee, my mom and dad and I, when I was like in second grade, and we moved to Texas, and we lived on the border, like border towns in Texas. That's mostly where I grew up, spent most of my life growing up. So all of my friends were Hispanic. I was in the minority most of the time. There weren't that many white guys going to these schools where I grew up, and so my experience was basically. I grew up as a minority, not as a majority. I didn't grow up in a white school with like only a couple of black kids or Asian or Hispanic kids. I mean, it was the opposite for me. And so, what I noticed was whenever we would go back in the summers and I'd go visit my family in Tennessee and my cousins and everything. Oh my gosh, it was like walking into another world, because every single thing my uncles and aunts and cousins were saying was about. They were dropping the N-word. They were, talking about black people and how you can't trust them, and they all carry a razor blade, and they'll all lie to you and steal from you and rob you, and don't turn your back on them and don't trust them. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? It was like the racism was so stark and obvious to me. And again, I didn't grow up in it, so I think I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful that we did move away from that environment when I was very young, because that way I didn't grow up in that environment where that's the language people use, and those were not the assumptions that I grew up with, and my parents weren't this way, so they didn't teach me any of this garbage. But anytime I go back to visit family in Tennessee, or anytime I'm just around someone who's racist, it really makes me angry. It really, really bothers me. And when I hear lately, I don't know if you guys have probably noticed, like there's been all kinds of things coming up about how it seems like it's mostly in the Bible Belt, mostly in the South, but I wouldn't say exclusively. But these kind of things where people will say Christians, and this is what really bothers me. Most of it is Christians. I got to say, I think most racist people I've met, unfortunately, have been Christians. And then the scary thing is that they're basing their racism on the brand and the version of Christianity they've been handed by their pastor or by their church. That, for example, there was just a video the other day on Facebook where there was a lady saying her chapel wouldn't perform mixed race weddings.
Yeah, I saw that.
And like, what are you talking about? And that kind of thing happens a lot, right? There's other quotes of people saying that they don't believe in mixed race marriages, again, because quote unquote, it's I'm a Christian or I believe the Bible. Like, do you guys understand? There really aren't any white people in the Bible, or if there are, they're not the heroes. None of the prophets, Jesus, the disciples, the apostles, they are not white people. The Bible isn't about white people. So you understand this? Like, but we don't. It's like we've got this really twisted idea. Anyway, sorry, it's my rant, but it really bothers me. And I think it gives us a really twisted idea of who God is and what the gospel's about. And yeah, this topic kind of bugs me.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that I saw this great cartoon by David Hayward, The Naked Pastor, and he had this. When you were talking, Keith, it reminded me of that. It's got a big Bible, and then it's got like 2 arrows and 2 people, and one's got a gun,
Yep.
and the other's got a heart, and it's just like, yeah, it's amazing how we're reading the same book, and we're coming up with mutually exclusive conclusions. like we're justifying not having a mixed race wedding because of the like, are you serious right now? Like, and then on the other hand, you have people who are concluding that, there are no dividing lines, like Paul concluded. There are to be no dividing lines, and it doesn't mean. And what I'm not saying is that it's not okay to say, yeah, I'm a proud Black person, or I'm a proud gay person, or I'm a proud Mexican person. It's not saying that we don't have those things or that we shouldn't. It's just saying that those are not to be lines with which we divide.
Right.
And to use the Bible and the gospel to divide along racial or sexual or gender differences is, well, it's Antichrist.
Right. Well, and again, this is the problem. Unfortunately, even the topic is racism, but as you just said, it honestly kind of goes back to the Bible, unfortunately, for Christians. And here's the problem with the Bible. I can use the Bible to prove anything I want. Just pick something, and okay, I can use the Bible to build a case to say, for example, something ridiculous as there shouldn't be mixed race marriages, because I can find a handful of verses that support that idea. But here's the other thing. I can find verses in the Bible to support the opposite idea, right? Like there's a really specific verse where Moses takes a wife, and it says she had dark skin. And his brother and sister, right, Aaron and Miriam, didn't like her because she was dark-skinned, and God curses them with leprosy because of that. Like, okay, that seems like a pretty strong thing way at the beginning of the book, that God is sort of against this idea of being against a mixed-race marriage and coming against somebody because they have dark skin. And yet people have built a case somehow using cherry-picking verses in the Bible to say that mixed race marriages is something God is against. Like, it's so crazy. But again, it goes back to this idea: do we want something that's quote unquote biblical? Because I think that's where we get into trouble. Or do we want something Christ-like? Like, personally, I would rather have a more Christ-like world, because if we start with Christ, we can't end up in these places where we say one race is better than another, or we say that we shouldn't love certain people because of their skin color or their nationality or whatever. It's crazy. But we have to draw this distinction in our minds, and we have to get this straight in our heads. And I'm hoping that people who are listening to this podcast aren't struggling with this kind of a thing, that they're not going, yeah, I love the Heretic Happy Hour, but I just don't know about mixed race marriages, and I just don't know about Black people or Asians or whatever. Like, oh my gosh. But if you do, I really, really encourage you to prayerfully work through this issue, and understand that any biases we have against other races, against other ethnicities, this doesn't come from God. This doesn't come from Christ. This comes from our culture. It comes from most likely our parents. This is something we have been trained to behave this way and think this way. And these are things we need to unlearn pretty seriously.
Yeah, I think when I think about racism, I mean, I look at it as another form of judgment. Just people who operate from a place of that whole tree of knowledge of good and evil, where there's constant judgment. This is right and this is wrong. It's another way to judge people. As being something. There's something wrong with them. I think for me, and again, it's natural in that sense, in that world where, if you're different, then that different is automatically assumed to be like not good, and I remember, I can't actually remember ever. I think I was aware. It's hard because it's like a fish growing up in water, it's like, you kind of assume it's normal. For me, it was always normal to to feel different, just because my dad, my mom is white, white American, and, has European, mostly English heritage. And then my dad was born and raised in East Africa, but his heritage is from India, so he's Indian, but was raised in an island called Zanzibar, which is now part of Tanzania. That's his home. That's where he's from. And then he migrated his family. There was a revolution on the island. They migrated to Kenya and lived in Mombasa. And so and then of course he migrated to the United States. And so I have this culture, my mom comes from a southern, I wouldn't say southern, like South, deep South, but in Ohio, I grew up in Ohio. So she's from her part of that city was like outside the main cities. It was part of those little towns in southeastern Ohio. And that has a real kind of backwards kind of culture in the sense of that, there's a lot of racism. There was a lot of just backwards kind of thinking, what I would call backwards thinking. And my mom didn't embody that. She was, she had really kind of rejected some of that thinking, but her side of the family embodied that. So I didn't even feel, when I would go around my cousins, aunts and uncles, I always felt like, they would always say Jamal, and like, of course my name isn't a typical American name. It's Jamal, and most white folks, you'll never meet white people named Jamal. I don't know any white people named Jamal. Of course, a lot of people wouldn't even consider me white, but I am half white. My mom, is white. So, but my name's Jamal. So immediately I feel like I'm different. I'm darker complected, dark hair and that kind of thing. So in my mom's side of the family, they're all light complected and that kind of thing. So I was always felt, and they would talk about my dad. My dad's name is, his first name is Abid, ABID is a different name. His middle name is Hussein. So, during the Gulf War, which when I was growing up, that was kind of the big thing. Saddam Hussein was the big call. It sounds like your dad's name, Hussein. I always get that, we had, when I was a younger kid, in our neighborhood that we grew up in, there was, it was kind of what I would call, I would call a redneck neighborhood. And, we had our house spray painted the N-word on the side of our house. Of course, we're not black or not African American, but, to some folks that view anything different, that's kind of, you got to get, that label put on you. So we had the N-word spray painted on the side of our house. People threatened to burn our house down in this neighborhood. So we ended up moving. So that was reality for me. I mean, that was very much, I felt that, and so it was just and then, even more recently, like I ended up moving to the South a number of years ago from Ohio, and I was getting pulled over every other week, getting tickets. So in the North, I didn't get pulled over. When I moved south to Tennessee, I was getting pulled over all the time. So I got it. I would hear comments, people, police officers asking me, "Hey, so where are you from? Where are you headed to? Where are you going?" And that was typical. So I just was like, yeah. And then even just more recently, I moved to Southern California, and when my wife and I, we were looking to move to the mountain area and look for homes up here in the mountain to live in. And when we would inquire, anytime there was a listing, and this is just reality, I would actually call to inquire about a home, and I never got calls back. I almost never got calls back. Ever. And I'm like, wow, no one returns my call. Of course, I put my name in, Jamal, never get a call. But as soon as my wife would put her name and information in, she'd get a call back in 5 minutes. And so, you don't have to be like, it's like, okay, so even, and then this is 2019, of course, when it was like a little over a year ago when we were looking for a place here in the mountains, but that's a reality. It's just, if it's the unknown, somebody named Jamal applying, putting a name on an application, or inquiring about a home or whatever. It's just, we don't have to call that person back. And I don't even think people are conscious of it, but it's a reality. It's just,
Well, and I think a lot of the issues surrounding race and racism is less than overtly conscious. And so and what I mean is that it's on a systemic level, and it could be, unless you're a person of color, you're not going to see it as much, right? We all view things through our lens and our grid and our filter. But unless you're really looking for, unless you're listening to people of color, and that's what I think is first and foremost on all these conversations, is that white people have been talking for too long. Like white people need to be second or third or fourth. We're not first in having the conversation, because systemically, it does affect people of color, and unless we're really looking for it, we're not going to experience in any way, shape, or form the same as people of color. And so
Right.
let me give you one example and what I mean on a systemic level. White people and black people typically use drugs around the same rate. I forget the percentages. And there's different drugs of choices between the two groups. However, for nonviolent drug offenses, black people are locked up way more often than white people, yet they're doing drugs at the same rate. And so that, I think, shows that there is a systemic bias against black people,
Yes.
especially in that area. And this is what I think is going on when we talk about white privilege. It doesn't mean that every person who's white had some privileged life. It just means they weren't oppressed because of their whiteness per se.
Right.
Right. I mean, maybe you grew up in a shitty home. Maybe you grew up in a broken home. Maybe you grew up around violence and drugs and crime, and you're white and you were poor. But it wasn't because of your whiteness. Right. When we talk about systemic racism or white privilege, we're talking about black people or other people of color who are oppressed simply because of their color.
Right.
Right. So I think it's always important to distinguish. I think some people get confused. Oh, well, I grew up in a broken home and I was white and I was poor. So there's obviously no white privilege. No, that's not what we're saying. It's not to discredit your experience, but it's to say, well, you were probably not privileged because of other circumstances, not necessarily your skin color.
Yeah. And then, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is the thing too. And I think it's something where, there's certain kinds of racism. It's very obvious to notice when somebody calls someone the N-word or, makes a joke, an off-color joke about somebody's race or something like that. So, or even what Jamal's talking about, where people won't call him back to rent him a house because he leaves his name Jamal. And so, but there's also these situations of America is a nation that, if we go back historically, the economy of this nation was built upon, in fact, the wealth of this nation was built upon, the success of this nation built upon slavery and slave labor. This is how so many people in the South got rich and industries flourished because of cheap slave labor. And so it's kind of embedded into the psychosis of the nation that we have an entire nation with systems built to favor white people. And there are so many examples of this kind of a thing. There's a documentary called 13, which is excellent to kind of expose some of this. And what I'm saying is, it's the kind of a thing where, as a white person, I can't see it, because I'm experiencing it. I experience the world a certain way, in other words. And I experience the world in a certain way that I sometimes assume everyone must experience the world this way. But the reality is that the world that I experience tends to favor me because I am born to a certain family and live in a certain neighborhood, and I'm given certain privileges that I assume everyone has, but they don't, and I don't realize it because I haven't grown up in this other home and in this other nationality, and I haven't experienced these things where, and sometimes it's systemic. Sometimes it is something where, I can't rent a house because of my skin color, or my kids can't go to a certain school because of their ethnicity, or I can't get a certain job because of my name or my nationality or background. Those things are also happening. But there's also things that are going on that are even more subtle than that we are oblivious to. And so anyway, it's helpful. It's really helpful to do some research. In fact, it's even the most helpful thing, to be honest, is just sit down with your friends. Hopefully you have some who are, if you're white, sit down with people who are Hispanic or Asian or Black and who have grown up under this kind of thing, and just get them to tell you what it's like. Get them to tell you what their experiences are. And you'll pretty quickly notice, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I've never experienced that. I've never been treated that way. I've never had that kind of thing in my life. And so the more that we can have our eyes open to that kind of a thing, I think the more it helps us to recognize just how pervasive it is and how destructive it is. And then maybe find ways that we can help to change that, to help people who aren't white, who aren't privileged, to kind of get over that and get around that?
Yeah, one of the things that I think needs to be talked about, because I hear this a lot and I get it. I totally get it. But there's a conversation out there a lot about specifically so nobody, because if you're born white, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you're born white. It doesn't make you a racist or, anything like that. And so a lot of times I've heard lots of folks who've come, from a white background that would say, I'm tired of the racism conversation. I am not a racist. I don't do anything that's racist. I'm tired of white people being, talk about white privilege and all this kind of thing. And, there's a sense of gosh, I'm not a part of that. So why do I get lumped into this, or why do I have to? And I get that. I understand that. But here's what I would like to say. And I'll put it back to so as a life coach, when I'm doing coaching work with people, there's a real reality. There's if you're interested in healing, obviously, people who call themselves followers of Jesus, I think are motivated by the healing of the world, or at least that's the idea of Jesus. The aim of Jesus is that people would be transformed and healed. Okay. So we care about healing. I know you do. I know people listening to this do. We care about healing. So in my work as a coach, the whole point of this is healing so people can move forward. There's something really powerful about going back in time for that person. And okay, when there's an issue, when there's a repetitive pattern and people are experiencing, I always like to pinpoint, when is the first time you began to feel this thing in your own life? And when we can go back to a memory and begin to recall that memory on an individual basis, and even just examine that, kind of get present with that memory, and then maybe even put a new perspective around that memory, there's a release of toxin. There's a release of hurt and pain that was trapped inside, that was keeping that person held back. And that is true on an individual basis, but I will also say it's true on a collective basis beyond just the individual life. So it didn't take me long in life. I was a corrections officer for 4.5, almost 5 years as a young adult. I worked in a prison, and it was way lopsided racially. And, people, and so African American people have a much higher rate of incarceration. It does not take a rocket scientist to look and to say, economically, socially, there is some pain, really deep pain in minority communities and are in this country. And it's, even though all over the world you can find that same thing, it's different. The black and white thing is very unique to the United States. I was in France not too long ago, and I attended a wedding with white family and a black family, and literally it gets very common. No, people don't even blink. They have their own issues of racism in Europe as well. I'm not saying they don't, but in this issue with black and white, I talked to a black French lady who had come to the United States to study, and she was like, I didn't even realize I was black until I came to the United States. She's like, it was like, I'm human first, and yeah, maybe black, but it wasn't like such a big deal. And here it's like, wow, you really feel it, and it feels separate and ostracized and that kind of thing. There is a real issue in this country. And I think where white people can participate in the healing of our culture is by helping to get conscious. And again, we do this as an individual. We read history books. We know that the Africans were kidnapped and taken from their continent and brought over here. We get that from history, but there's not really been an owning of it on a collective basis where we sit back and we say, hey, this happened and it was really wrong. And the suffering that there's still, and we know this from even DNA. In DNA, I don't know if you know this, there's this thing called telomeres, which Holocaust, people who were affected by the Holocaust just 60, 70 years ago, that telomeres were altered in their DNA and shows up in their grandchildren. Now it's still there. So there is trauma, collective trauma in physical DNA. We've seen this in the work that's done in genetics, but it's also spiritual, emotional trauma that doesn't go away overnight. And just so when white people say, hey, I didn't live back then. Right. I heard Mitch McConnell, the Republican speaker or the majority leader in the Senate say, hey, we weren't born back then. We don't really answer to that. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of how life works. So it's really important to acknowledge that. And I think that's where in a political conversation, there's talk of saying, hey, reparations or whatever, there's a candidate that I support, Marianne Williamson, who says she's actually, and this is not to be overt political, but there's a place for it to say, okay, guys, we have never as a collective society owned this and have even acknowledged from an apology standpoint, from a financial standpoint, whatever, like, hey, there's a whole community of people that have been deeply affected and we are sorry for it. It's not, people say, I didn't have anything to do with it. You're speaking as an individual, but you can't neglect it collective.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned up the intergenerational trauma, because that's so true. And it does bug me that people are like, oh, I didn't live 200, 300 years ago. It's like, well, hold on. We had new slavery called Jim Crow. We had our grandparents' generation, and I'm in my 30s, so my grandparents' generation, their interracial was marriage was illegal. Not that long ago. So don't give me this bullshit that it's somehow 200, 300 years ago, because it gets passed on and passed on and passed on. And it might look more subtle than having people pick cotton for you. It might look more subtle than that. Right. I mean, like, sure, I can concede that. But, when you're locked up for a nonviolent drug offense, let's say, you get stripped of your rights and your constitutional rights. And so this is still going on. Like, so this isn't 200, 300 years ago only. It gets passed on, it gets imbued with the thread of the culture. And you're right, Jamal, we need to own up to that. And
in World War II, like prior to World War II, right around that time when it was happening, there was after Pearl Harbor, obviously, there was such distrust of Japanese Americans in the United States that we rounded that I'm gonna say we as a collective society rounded Japanese folks up of Japanese descent and put them in literal concentration camps. Like this is stuff that Hitler was doing in the ghettos. I mean, obviously we didn't kill them and gas them, but I tell you what, that the starting points of that began to happen, where we're and most Americans aren't even aware of that. We actually rounded up Japanese Americans and put them in prison camps, and there was an acknowledgement. I think it was Ronald Reagan in his presidency in the 80s acknowledged the gross injustice of that, and ended up giving. I think it was the folks who were descendants of or people who even still alive. I think they paid them 20. I don't want to get the number wrong, but it was a number of money. It was a sum of money that the government paid them to actually acknowledge just the tragedy of that. And, again, we can debate at the political spectrum how that should be done, but there really needs to be a collective owning, because I can't believe where it's 2019 and we've never as a collective society said, this happened and it was wrong and we're sorry. And there has been repercussions, and the playing field is not even. So when white folks say, "Hey, the playing field is even," you're thinking as an individual and not as a collective society.
Right.
Not even.
And it's not here. This is the thing. It's when we're talking about this sort of systemic racism. Is that if you're white, you assume, oh well, we don't have slavery anymore, and why don't you guys still live in the past? Yeah, it's just we have to wake up. We have to recognize that this is still going on. And here's the thing: we either make an effort to educate ourselves about it and to do something about it and to bring some healing and hope and change this, or we're just by our ignorance and by our silence, we're sort of enabling kind of thing to continue. We have to be willing to even own up to our own part in this, right? And maybe the part that we're contributing to it isn't, we're not flipping people off and calling them the N-word or whatever, but we are silently going along with a system that favors us and keeps other people down and doesn't allow them. This is again the frustrating thing, because I've said this so many times, I've written blogs about this and I've had conversations with people about this, and it's always the white person that comes back to me and always pushes back and always says, "But Keith, is this really true? And do people really talk this way? And do people really act this way?" And they're the ones denying that it's happening. It's funny because I've never had anyone black or brown or somebody who's from a minority come back to me, "I don't believe in this." I want to do a little bit about the label of racist is used to derail conversations.
Yes. Yes. Can I jump in? I definitely want to address that, because I think the labeling, using the word racist as an accusation is really not helpful. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it doesn't really help to say, "Oh, you're racist" or "somebody's racist." It's just a word that gets thrown around a lot. I think I think the conversation needs to be, okay, are you aware of there are systems in the world that are racist, have a racist kind of, they're colored through this lens of racism, but I don't know that people are inherently racist. Even the hardened folks that are like, people say, man, you're totally racist. Like if you actually sit down and talk to them, if a person of color would sit down and talk to them, I mean, they wouldn't be racist. I mean, they were very accepting of other people. There's a lot of fear of the unknown, I don't like to use that word racist, but I would say, like, you can have a blind spot. All of us can have spots where we are going, oh yeah, I'm not really seeing something from the perspective of another. I think the way around this to get racially sensitive is to go, okay, how does that other person view it? How does that other community, other group, like, a white person who all you've known is what you've experienced, and then to assume that's the experience of everyone is racially insensitive for sure. Because it's like, yeah, that's not your experience. So of course you're not going to feel that way. But so to assume that a black person has your experience is actually racially insensitive. But I think we really do a disservice by lumping people and calling people racist. And I even see it in our political discourse with, is Donald Trump racist? People will say, oh, he's a racist, he's this, that. Like, well, what is that going to do? So what if you win your argument that he's racist? So what does that do? Because there's millions of Americans that support Donald Trump, and they're not racist. So are people racially insensitive? Is the president racially insensitive? Well, I think you can make a case that the answer is yes, but for sure. But again, we want to stop with the accusations, because accusations aren't getting once you get in, they have to defend themselves when they're accused. And as soon as somebody defends themselves, you're no longer in a conversation. You're now defending yourself, and that's not a conversation.
Yeah. Well, and what I was thinking of was because I've been accused of this myself, so I'm just going to lay it out there. Like whenever I will talk about theologically, I'll say, when Jesus is, for example, he gives the Olivet Discourse in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are parallel passages. What is he talking about? Because some Christians want to say that, well, he's talking about the end of the world and the second coming and blah, 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 but he's not. So I will go through it step by step and explain to them what Jesus is talking about is he's the final prophet to the Jewish people. He's warning them that if they don't repent of their ways and if they continue to seek revolution against the Romans, they're going to be destroyed, and the temple is going to be thrown down, and they're all going to be wiped out, and it's going to be the end of the Jewish age. And by the way, that is exactly what did happen, right? And so all I'm doing is explaining that, right? I'm just explaining that theological, historical point. When Jesus says this, here's what he's talking about, and here's how it was fulfilled in AD 70. This is exactly how it happened, and that's what it's about. It's not about the end of the world or the second coming or whatever. And then people will come back to me and say, Keith, now you're anti-Semitic. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, no. Because I think what they're assuming is, oh, well, you're saying that this is what they've come back to me and said. Either what I'm saying can be used by someone who is anti-Semitic to then say, therefore, Jews are bad or evil or worthy of being oppressed or whatever. Like, well, I guess maybe an anti-Semitic person could do that, but I'm not advocating that they do that, and I'm not drawing that conclusion. So should that mean that I just don't say this at all because someone could? You know what I mean? It sort of boxes me into this thing of like, well, now I guess now I can't ever answer this question again this way, because if I do, somehow I'm giving ammunition to somebody who doesn't like Jewish people. So that's the kind of thing where I've experienced it, where like, well, you kind of put me in a box where now like, I can't answer that question now. I'm not allowed to talk about this, which is kind of silly.
Yeah, I think we can take just about anything and use it for ammunition. I mean, just look at the Bible again. I mean, we could come out one end and be the most loving, caring person who wants to tear down all dividing lines, or we can be the most bigoted, hateful Westboro Baptist Church member yelling at gay people and picketing weddings. I mean, it becomes a little tenuous when we take that approach. Like, well, you could use anything for
Of
fuel
course.
if you're looking
Right.
for it. You know?
Yeah, and now at the same time, I will admit, so that when someone brought this up to me, it makes me more sensitive. So now when I do answer that question, I kind of go out of my way to say a disclaimer, right? Hey, by the way, everybody, Jesus was Jewish. All the disciples and the apostles were Jewish. God loves people who are Jewish. He doesn't hate people, and we shouldn't either because of their ethnicity, whether they're Jewish or Asian or, Hispanic or Black or whatever. Like, this is not a racist, racially motivated idea here. This we know. And so, like, I kind of have to spend time, but I'm willing to do that because I don't want anybody to take this and turn it into sort of a bludgeon against people or to use it as an excuse. So yeah, I'm thankful. Okay, I'm aware of that, and so I want to avoid that. But
Right. And plus, as you've mentioned, Keith, I mean, we all have blind spots, and I'm not saying that's necessarily one of your blind spots, but to keep in mind that we always have them, and that the things we say could be used and could be picked up, and we might not even intend something, but we are being subtly racist or bigoted or ignorant because we do. I think it gives us a lot of. I think freedom to understand that we have blind spots so that we're always working internally on what those might be and listening to other people be like, oh, I didn't even think of it like that, but thank you for bringing that up to me because I wasn't even aware,
Yeah. Hey, the whole time we've been talking, I'm sorry, I was trying to find something that my friend Valerie McGowan said. She's African-American and I love her so much, man. She has been a gift to me. And she's made some amazing observations on some of the threads that I've shared on Facebook and on my blog and stuff. And I found this one response that she gave to somebody I wanted to share, if I could, so short. Because I was having a conversation a few months ago on Facebook about racism. And a guy came on, one of my friends came on who's white, and he said, well, there's reverse racism as well. I'm a white person. And one time I was at Walmart and I had a black person call me a honky and flip me off and, say bad things about white people. So yeah, so there you go. It goes both ways. And I know what it's like to experience this. And so her response to this guy was so good because it was so gentle and kind and respectful. And she said, hey, I'm really sorry that happened to you. And yeah, it does suck, doesn't it? I know what that feels like too. So yeah, I know that doesn't feel good. But then she said, but here's what I want you to ask yourself, so you're saying that experience you had one time when that one person called you a bad name because of your race and because you were white. Yes, it was bad, but just consider this. Have you ever experienced a situation, I'm quoting her now. Have you ever experienced a situation where there were laws stating that you as a white person were scientifically and mentally inferior? Were you by law, because you were white, forbidden to vote, obtain an education, travel to certain towns after dark, known as sundown towns, live in certain southern states as a free person, or live in the neighborhood of your choice that was affordable to you? Were you ever thought to be a thief because of your skin color? Were you as a teenager threatened with lynching because a black woman claimed you made advances toward her? Do police automatically assume you're a gangbanger because you're a white kid driving a nice car? Have you ever been barred from eating at any restaurants because of your skin color? Do hospitals refuse to treat you because you're white? Did you ever grow up seeing anyone that looks like you, never seeing anyone that looks like you represented in popular media, on television shows and things like that? She goes, these are all examples of actual systemic racism. It's systemic and universal, not about personal hurt feelings. And I love that response because, again, it's something that I don't think about, right? As a white person, I don't ever put myself in those shoes. Why? Because I've never experienced any of those things. My family members, my grandmother, my grandfather never experienced any of those things. So I don't have that sort of cloud hanging over me, or I don't swim in those waters. And so having someone help me sort of take off those glasses and clearly and go, wow, okay, yeah, that's real. You know what I mean? That is something I've never had to deal with.
And it's a great point. And I just, my encouragement on this podcast, I know we're wrapping up here, but I would encourage people to think as a healer, not think as an individual victim, because, white people can take on a victim mentality very easily and say, oh, well, and again, that doesn't allow you to hear. Once you feel attacked, if you feel like someone's calling you racist, now you shift into victim mentality. Now you're defending yourself. You're not hearing. So what I would invite people, specifically white people, because I do think white people, need a perspective on this. Okay. I just do. I just really feel like there's a perspective shift that needs to happen amongst folks who are white. And again, it's not a problem that you're white. Not at all. Half my family is white. I get it. But I think to shift into mode of healer. And as a healer, what you want to do, and this is what I do, again, like I mentioned in coaching, you want to go back in time with somebody and sit with them in their point of trauma. And this is what therapists do, but there's a point to it. You sit with them in that to help release it. And so we want to think not as individuals, but as collective. What if we as a collective people can just participate, go back in time, realize the trauma of being literally kidnapped away from your way of life, to put it on these ships, taken, stripped of your identity, of your name, of your record, and then systematically kept as cattle for 400 years. And then all of a sudden someone says, it's over. And there's a stroke, there's a war that's fought. Then there's a stroke of the pen that releases you. And yet nothing changes on the ground. And this goes on another 100 years till like 60 years ago. And then there's outcry. Let's sit with the trauma of that. And then, for generations of people to feel completely insignificant and of no value. Like, let's just sit with that collectively in history and just witness it as a white person, just witness what that's like and the horror of it. And feel it in your body. Just feel it. You don't have to become like this perpetrator and that you did it. And I'm not saying taking on any kind of, accusation for yourself. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying get present with it and feel it, because it's real trauma and it's still even in the physical DNA of the descendants. It's here and the effects are real, spiritually, physically, emotionally. It's still here. And how we heal it is by getting present with it and releasing it. And that's what's needed. Really, I think white people have a privilege and have an ability to help heal folks of color in this country, because we have the ability to acknowledge that as a collective, not as an individual, as a collective. We can do it.
A lot of this has been so good, guys. I wish we can keep the conversation going, but we got to wrap it up. So thanks for having this conversation. I think this is a good way to kick off the quote unquote culture. What do we call it? The Culture Wars series. But we'll carry the conversation on, on our Facebook group and all that, which Keith, you could tell the folks about. But I just want to let people know about two quick things. We do have a website, heretichappyhour.com, and we do have a Patreon site. So if you love the show, you want to see it continue, you want to help us continue to bring shows like this one and give you a bunch of bonus stuff, which we'll record. And we have bonus interviews with Sam Kline. We have bonus interviews with all of our guests, or most of our guests. It's patreon.com/heretichappyhour. And we got a lot of cool shit over there. So thanks.
Yeah. And by the way, if you are one of our Patreon supporters, thank you very much. You are eligible to join our private Facebook group called the Heretic Happy Hour Facebook group. And we continue to have conversations over there about these podcast episodes. And we also have a second group. Yes, we have not one, but two Facebook groups. There's also one called the Heresy After Hours group. And that's one that's more wide open to discuss issues of deconstruction. And we've also invited other podcast hosts and listeners to join us there as well. So it's a nice big group to discuss topics like that. So we invite you to join us there as well. And I want to talk to you guys real quick about something called Square One. So this is a 90-day transformational coaching program that I'm doing. This is to help people who want to move from deconstruction to reconstruction. And so, when you question your faith, you lose family and friends and fellowship. It's not just the theological side of it. It's also, there's a strong sort of emotional side of it as well that you have to deal with, that honestly, that I found nothing really addresses all of these things. So that's what we're going to be doing starting September the 30th. I only have 10 seats available. We're doing 12 total, but 2 were filled. So we have 10 seats available at the moment. And if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, I would invite you to join me at Square One. You can learn more at bk2sq1.com. That stands for Back to Square One. bk2sq1.com. HOTW.com.
Yes, and I want to mention a program I'm kicking off here in the month of October. It's called the Awakening Workshop, and as a life coach, I've worked with individuals, but what I'm doing now is I'm really transitioning into working with groups, small groups of people. But I've discovered that they're in the area of personal awakening. So, like people. I really believe that life is meant to be lived when you're just fully awake and conscious. And in the process, sometimes we get stuck and we keep hitting our wall. We feel like there's things we're hitting our head against the wall and we're not moving forward in life. We just feel stuck. And there's patterns to that, to the trauma that we were experiencing in our life. And if you're just tired of being stuck, I've developed this thing called the Awakening Workshop, where I take some foundational elements I do in personal coaching and really boil it down into like this 5-week program where we're going through the steps of awakening. And there are steps. I've discovered there are steps to waking up to your highest and fullest self. And so if that sounds like something that you're interested in, I have the Awakening Workshop is a 5-week, and I'm capping it at 5 people. So we keep it small, but you'll be working with 5 other people and working through the steps of awakening. If that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, it's coming up in October. You can message me on Facebook, or you can go to my website, which is JamalJavanji.com, and you can contact me through my website, and just let me know that you'd like some more information about the Awakening Workshop, and I'll get that info out to you. And also, we are on iTunes, so you can rate us and review us, and 5 stars only and good reviews. So do that if you haven't already. It really helps.
That's right. And good things will happen to you if you do that.